Hello and welcome to another episode, the 33rd episode, no less, of the Shakedown podcast. It is the 3rd of the 5th. The year is 2023. I have with me, as always, my co-host Baxty and my co-host Shez. I would ask you guys how you are, how you doing this week, but you guys will blank me and leave me hanging just as you did last week. Let's get straight into the F1 chat, lads. We had a sprint weekend with a shootout, a qualifying session, a new format, a decent sprint race, a not so decent race. What were your thoughts, Baxty, on this new format sprint race hybrid thingy-majig?
I think the jury is still a little bit out with me because I think Baku was a horrendous track to trial this at. Like, I get Baku has the long straight, but that doesn't necessarily scream sprint race to me. I think you want to do your sprint races at your shorter tracks, at your Austrias, your Interlagoses. I think Silverstone is just on that limit where you could probably get away with it. But I just think that the new format has potential. Because you did get two quite different grids, which was nice. But I just think Baku was completely the wrong track to do this at.
Shez, talk to me, sir.
I quite liked it. I thought the format was a fairly sensible progression. In that it helped with a few of the criticisms that the sprint races have had so far. The first that qualifying on a Friday, even though the fastest person gets pole for the Saturday sprint race, it was never actually counted as a pole. Now it is. Now you qualify on Friday, you are on pole for the race on Sunday. Perfect. That's good. No ambiguity there. And then it means that on Saturday you lose that completely pointless FP2 session where the cars are essentially in parc ferme, but they're just running around. And you can imagine that most teams are going to say there's no point. So at least now they've turned it into a session that is worth watching. And actually, as you said, it was quite a good sprint race, I thought, this weekend.
The statement of the year, Shez. Bloody Nora, I enjoyed that. Go on, sorry.
The race left a lot to be desired, but I thought the sprint Saturday, which I guess is what they're going to have to call it for now, isn't it? Is it just sprint Saturday? Is actually worked out quite nicely. And just to add in my own sort of personal twist to this, I'm hoping now that they've taken the sprint race out of any meaningful result for the weekend. It doesn't set the grid for Sunday or anything like that. I'm hoping that this is a tentative first step towards doing a reverse championship position race on a Saturday. You know what? I've been wanting one for the last 3-4 years, and if this is how they convince everyone that it's a good idea, so be it.
You behave yourself, Shez, and Santa Claus will definitely deliver your Christmas presents down the chimney this year. Let's not, I think pigs might fly before we see that, Shez, if I'm honest. Go on then to this sprint race, mate. I'm conflicted here, I will be honest, because I think the FOM and the FIA are deserving of some credit because the sprint race isn't yet in its final form. I think it's a brilliant idea, but it needs tinkering with, and pat on the back of the FIA and the FOM for tinkering with it, because this is an iterative process that we're dealing with here, and hopefully in the end we will get there. I'm not sure that we're there yet, and I don't think the FIA even think we are there yet. There are still many iterations before we do get to final form. But I will say this, lads, as far as the old Saturday morning, holy smokes. Now, I don't know whether this was anomalous, but the interaction between Max Verstappen and George, lads, I'm here for it. Some proper racing between two of the best on the grid. And it got techie, didn't it, Shez? Talk to me about the cheeky love kiss and the wheel-to-wheel automated pugilism between one King George Russell of Kings in Norfolk and one Super Max Verstappen.
I guess my first response to that is, which love tap are you talking about? Because there were plenty of them in that first three or four corners.
There were two.
Oh, it's great. It was really, really good. George is making a bit of a habit of getting off the line really well now. Having had that as a bit of a problem in his Williams days, he was quite cautious, wasn't he? But now he's really going for it, and it's starting to create a fun little dynamic because I think Max does race Lewis differently to the way he races everybody else, but he races George quite similarly to how he would race everyone else, as in, keeps a bit of distance. We'll try and keep it as clean as possible, not do a dive bomb down the inside
Shez,
when it's not on.
I'm not sure. I finish your thinking and I'll come, because I'm not sure that's quite right there, Shez.
But I think George doesn't have that. George is doing Max versus Lewis, right? He's much more like, I'm the big gun around here, and I need to prove myself. And the way that played out was a slightly, George did well to get ahead, but it felt slightly clumsy at times, especially the way it ended with Max's side pod with a hole in it.
From George, Shez.
From George, yeah.
Okay.
And there were two sort of post hoc statements that I thought were interesting regarding all of this. The first was Toto saying that exactly what I've just said, that he thinks that Max doesn't race Mercedes differently to everybody else. He just races Lewis differently to everybody else. That seemed to play out a little bit because Max seemed to be doing everything he could to get out of George's way. Whereas
about all that, mate, but come on, this is getting a bit techie. This is Shez.
Yeah, sure. This is what we're here for, right? Whereas, and the other side of it was George kind of saying, "Well, I'm not here to back down to anybody else, and I'm gonna do whatever I need to do." And Max's response to that, Max's little, what did he say? Max said something really interesting, sort of. You have to come back to me because I can't remember what he said. He said something very
over the radio.
No. He said it afterwards. I've lost my
expect the same again.
Yeah, perhaps. No, it was something to do with what he said was George tried to do to me what I do to him, but I do it better, essentially, is what he said. He said, I would dive down the inside. I just know how to do it a bit better than George does. And I won't, I make the corner. I don't use the other person as a roadblock. And I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree with that. Well, but it was interesting to hear him say that.
There is evidence and more than one exhibit that evidence to the contrary, Max, but we will get to that. Baxty, talk to me. How did you react to that wheel-to-wheel automotive pugilism between George and Max?
Yeah, I mean, I know George has got a bit of a reputation for hitting people on lap one at the minute because he's taken out Carlos and I think Checo as well at points. Look, I mean, I thought Curry and Shandok's analysis of the incident in question was absolutely spot on. I think there was not a lot George could have done. Max left him the minimum amount of space that he could. And, there was a little touch and it did contribute to George overtaking Max because it compromised Max out the corner. But I just thought, the word dickhead was thrown around and there's only one in this situation and that's Max Verstappen.
Oh, let's go.
I mean, people will call me backing the British driver bias and everything else. And, fine, I don't care. The problem for me with how Max reacted to all of this was that there's ranting and raving, and look, I actually have no issue with him saying what he said to George, because helmets just come off, adrenaline is running. We all, Lewis has said some things in the cool down room that about Max as well, about certain things that he said about him. But I think it was the way he went on in the media pen afterwards. He was just like, again and again and again, he was throwing insult after insult after insult. So calling him Princess George and saying that, Mercedes like to hit us and just all this nonsense garbage. At some point, you just have to go, you know what? I still beat the guy. Like, if he'd lost to George, I'd understand why he might be ranting and raving a little bit. He still passed him with the relative ease, in later on in the sprint, with no issue. I know he had a hole in his car, but still, he still passed him and beat him on the day. And you just got to remember, you're also the world champion, and you ranting and raving like that, you're setting the example. Yeah, how many more people, young kids watching that, are going to start going to press and going like, "Oh, my opponent's this and my opponent's that, and they don't know what they're doing and they're clueless." And it's just like, just show a bit of decorum. People look up to you, and people pay attention to you because you have that number one on your car.
Oh, bloody Nora. How can I counter that, Baxty? Very well said and very clippable. But here I go. Anyway, I'm going to try and argue the case on a couple of different fronts. So, as I analyse the incident first and foremost, I think there were similarities between what we saw on Saturday and Silverstone 2021. It looked very similar, right? History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Very, very similar incident, and probably more in favour of Max on this occasion because there was an actual lock-up front left from George. So again, if we're going to play these rules by the rule to the letter, then because George was even momentarily out of control, then I think they've got to do more than just have a look at it or just radio silence it, right? I think if anybody was going to get a penalty, or even let's broaden it out, if anybody was going to get blame here, then I think we've got to lay some at King George Russell's feet, sadly. Nevertheless, George Russell is who we thought he was, right? Jake Aitken, bloody not Jack, I always forget. GP3 is another brilliant example of where this did. In fact, bloody Bottas all those years ago. Like, he has one mode. Him and Max looking into each other's eyes is very, to me, they are mirror images. They race similarly hard, aggressive, dive bombs, defending for their lives, arms out each and every single time. I think they're very similar, and I think this won't be the last clash that we see between these chaps. But you know what, fellas, if I'm honest, part-time casual, part-time purist, I am here for it, lads. I'm here for it. Like, I felt like I'd been my love for F1 had been rekindled. The flame burned brighter than it ever has done this year, at the very bloody least. I'm here for it, and I'm here for the interaction afterwards. I understand what you're saying, Baxty. I didn't like the fact that Max called George a dickhead. I just thought, like, well, really? It's a bit of a racing incident, mate. Okay, so George was to blame. Okay, you came off on the on the bad end of that love kiss, and okay, it didn't look good. It looked like a shark had taken a big chunk out your side pod. Cool, that wasn't very good. But a dickhead and Princess George, I mean, Max, man. But Max has only got one gear as far as like PR stuff. If he feels like he's been aggrieved, if that's his perception of the thing, we're going to keep seeing him come out with these sound bites, lads. And can I just fix one thing? This is something that I keep hearing so-called F1 scribes talk about, and Shez, you can back me up on this because we've had a conversation about this. I keep seeing, right, as far, and again, this is me backing up Max. I get that there is such a thing as inside line privilege, right? But that's on the condition that you intend on taking the racing line, on meeting the apex. What you can't do is miss the apex and crash into the other dude and then say, oh, well, you had all this room on the outside. This is racing. This is racing, and there is a racing line. Even if you are on the outside, you are trying to straight line the corner. The inside, the guy, to my knowledge, as long as I've been racing and karting, the guy on the inside can never just, he can't do a Brazil turn 4, Max Verstappen. The overcrowding can't be super aggressive because you should get penalised that, in my humble opinion. I keep seeing these graphics where people are drawing all this space on the outside of Max Verstappen into the turn, saying, well, Max had all this space that he could have used. Well, expect him to take, he's going to take the shortest line, right? Expect him to the shortest line and give King George as much space as he needs to take his shortest racing line. And I think in this circumstance, I think Max did that. And to be fair to the lad, he is quite good at that. He's going to give you space, but the minimal space needed. Yeah. Talk to me on this, Shez.
Yeah, and that's exactly that's what I mean by that move, that sequence of moves. George seemed fairly desperate to get past. He did it in the end, but he seemed very desperate to do it. I think Max is in a sort of mindset at the moment that George is coming at him, and he'll do his usual and leave just enough room. My comment about him racing Lewis differently is that oftentimes he wouldn't even leave enough room for Lewis to have enough space to get through the corner, right? Where he's giving George the space. George was just coming through come what may. And as you say, he even said it afterwards. And I think that conversation they had in the pit lane post race was actually George coming to apologize, and it ended up being ending how it did. But George was trying to say, look, I didn't have enough grip. And okay, that's not an excuse because everyone was the same, but that led to him understeering, I think, and causing at least one of the clips that he had with Max. Yeah, there is a little bit of a problem here though, in that the new 2021-2022 rules in terms of what is and what isn't allowed. Last season, can you guys remember what happened in Austria when on lap 1, George going down the inside of Checo? Checo went around the outside.
He got a penalty.
Yeah, he got a penalty, right? And because I think this is now the rule that if the car on the outside has got significantly ahead or has like their rear wheels or their front wheels ahead of the guy in front's rear wheels, then they have a right to that corner. So I remember George being all over the rumble strip and knocking Checo and still getting a penalty for it. So there's a bit of a grey area here in terms of what the racing rules are, and I agree they are very difficult to interpret given how we have all watched racing in the past. But George and Max like to keep quoting those rules whenever they have an incident like this.
Mate, I don't even think the FIA are sticking to those. I feel like what was utilised this weekend was like the old school common sense stuff, because if they had stuck to it, surely George would have got
I think if Max had ended up in the wall, then they would have given him. I think that would have ended differently.
But then this is nonsense, right? Because how... Like Max, surely, I know Christian exaggerated it and said that he was losing anywhere between like 0.5 and 3/4 of a second. I think that was exaggerated, but Max lost outright. So why do we? This is where the FIA pissed me off ever so slightly, because that makes no sense. What Max needed to have crashed into the wall for George to get a pet. I don't understand what's going on.
But it's the same kind of thing, right? That like in Silverstone 2021, do you think that Lewis would have got that 10-second stop go penalty or whatever if Max hadn't ended up in the wall?
No, absolutely not.
This is how the FIA practice penalties, isn't it?
This is bonkers, bro.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Again, this is going to be the root of many problems. Go on, Baxty, before I ask you a question, mate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I find Max's defense of the whole thing rather comical when he's like, oh, you shouldn't be taking too many risks. But, mate, you made your entire career on that. I mean, loath as I am to give Will Buxton flowers, he absolutely nailed it.
It's a bit rich.
He absolutely nailed it with his analysis, just saying that Max made his entire career of doing stuff like that, and now somebody does it to him, he doesn't like it. God tier level hypocrisy from Max. And then Christian Horner has the cheek to turn around and go, oh, well, good thing George had his helmet on. It's like, sorry, are you basically saying that you know that your driver would have punched him in the face? Because if you are, you're an absolute moron. Like, because first of all, we shouldn't be advocating drivers punching each other. That's just ridiculous. And yet you're basically saying, joking about the fact that Max probably would have hit him. We all remember what Max did to Ocon, went and gave him a little playful shove, as it were. Got his community service from Jean Todt. Well, let's be honest here. In front of the cameras of the world, I don't think Max would have had a problem pushing George. So Christian is a moron.
It's, you know what, Baxty, it's chaos. And I think bloody no, there's a couple of different things in what you said there, and this is the one that I want to nail. Right, I've heard this theory espoused by a couple of different people. Shout out to Spanners on Missed Apex podcast and Peter Windsor. The best racers race people differently, right? And Max Verstappen is going to cause himself an issue if he doesn't realise that when he's racing George wheel to wheel, he is basically racing himself. And a wise man, a great champion, would have seen in that setting, in that context, going into turn 2, that this isn't Lewis Hamilton who's going to jump out of my way at every turn. That's not who I'm racing here. And so, in conclusion, Max Verstappen probably wants to give George Russell the next time, because that's what he's saying, next time, same again, yeah? Next time, Max, if he's smart and crafty and has the savvy of a proper world champion, the likes of which we've seen before, he wants to give George Russell a little bit more room next time, because again, this is the theory that I'm talking about. People say that Schumacher, way back when, came along with his elbows out, super hard racing, revolutionised the fitness regime. But then in the end, 2005, 2006, Alonso was basically young Schumacher, right? And are we not seeing then, Shez, the rise of lots of young Max Verstappens that are just going to race hard and at every single turn for every single millimetre of tarmac? Is that what we're seeing, Shez?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a broader conversation, and one that I have to say, as much as that sequence of corners on Saturday was fun to watch, it's something that I'm a little afraid of, because I think we've come out of a generation of drivers, and I've said this before, you know, the Raikkonens, the Alonsos, the Hamiltons, the Buttons, all of those guys were hard races, but it was always fair. It was always there was never any sense that someone was going to send one down the inside. Not really.
Senna was.
Yeah. So let me come back to that. Right. So there was never really a sense that they were going to send one down the inside with no recall, no sort of thought about where their car was or where their rival was. But we're going back towards a Senna Schumacher style of racing, because I think we had that period in the 80s where the cars were getting a bit safer, and fatalities were happening less frequently, and drivers were happier to put it on the line a little bit, because they felt that, you know, actually my car will keep me safe. And Senna, you know, famously, it was said about him that he felt that nothing was going to touch him, and I felt that's how he drove. I'm coming past you. Then we went through the 90s. Schumacher sort of took on that mantle as well. Was very, very similar, and then we saw the change that in the noughties. You know, it started with Montoya. Even Montoya was hard, but he was fair. Raikkonen similar. Then your Alonso's came along, Hamilton came along, Button came along. All of those drivers have shown that you don't have to drive like that. But we're now that we're getting so far away from how Senna drove and the safety issues that we had back in the 80s and 90s, I feel like the generation that are coming through now, and Max is the epitome of that, have gone back to that no compromise, my car is a weapon kind of driving style. They're quick, don't get me wrong, right? Max is super, super quick, but there's a no compromise and a less nuanced way they go about driving, with each move thinking less about the race as a whole and more about, you know, I don't want to be shown up by the other guys. I'm just going to go.
They're going to send it, Shez, but
I feel like there's something lost in racing. And I think Saturday was interesting because we were able to see 3 or 4 corners where these guys fought it out, because neither of them wanted to give up. But I don't think that's how this plays out most of the time. Most of the time, rather than waiting, you'll go for it. One of you is going to go off, or worse. And that's kind of what I don't want to see in the racing that I watch particularly. I'd like to see a bit of nuance. I'd like to see a bit of planning.
I hear you in that, Shez, but you know what, bro? Sometimes you've got to sometimes you've got to send it. If you're George Russell and you're not competing for a championship, and you get a whiff of being able to put a wheel up the inside of Max Verstappen, who, by the way, has a lot more to lose than you and is competing for a championship. Mate, I've been crying out for Lewis to do something like that for ages. Send a message, man. It can't just be... Racing is a dance of sorts, right? But it doesn't work if it's just one way. You lend yourself to being a doormat then, and I'm so... Shez, honestly, I can't remember a time when I was just like... I was punching the air, mate. That just the fact that Russell would have... That Russell had a pair, right? He had a pair, and in every facet of that, the body language, fronting up to Max Verstappen after they both come out the cockpit, fronting up to him, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. Mate, I am George is rapidly becoming.
There's an argument here that this is the time. Yeah, I mean, there's an argument here to say that this is the time to do it to Max, though, right? Where Australia is actually quite a good example where George took him off the line and then Lewis took him into turn 4. This is the time to do it to him because he knows that you're going to go past him on lap 1, but he's going to go past you again a few laps later, which is exactly what he did. And
Shez, even that, like the way that Max kept on saying, well, like post race, he was like, "Well, I'm gonna pass him back anyway. So what's the point?" That is exactly the
why
point,
people
Max.
want to go past.
That's exactly the point. That's a case in point. Even like, what do you want about this? Is racing, Max Verstappen.
100% agree with you. Look, but can I just say that Lewis is learning to do that now? I mean, that is what Turn 4 in Australia was his version of a dive bomb, where he left very, very minimal amount. When you hear Max making a complaint over the radio post move, you know that you've probably done a Max to Max,
which is crazy. Baxty, come on in this lastly before we tangent.
Yeah, I'm going to use Lewis's words from many years ago to kind of tell Max why drivers are more likely going to dive bomb him and stand up to him a little bit more. And he said this not when in his first ever joint interview with Jenson Button as McLaren teammates. He said, when you have the number 1 on your car, you have a massive target on your back. Everyone is going to want to get you. And Max has the number 1 on his car. And George Russell, Russell would have done that to any driver. If any driver's there, he would have done the same thing. But this was Max, and he was going to show Max, I may not have the car right now, but when I do have a car, I'm coming for you, and I'm coming for that number 1, and I'm going to stick it on my car. That felt like a psychological message from George saying, I'm coming, just you wait. Like Max used to do to Lewis. Max used to say, even before 2021, he used to say, look, I may not have the car now, but I'm coming for you, son.
Yeah, let's a rain check on those fights. George isn't messing about, lads, and I'm here for it. Go on then, let's talk about Ferrari very quickly. Charles Leclerc again, miced around Baku, but what is the issue there, lads? Is it just a circumstance of him not having the machinery that's sufficiently kind on its tyres? Like, what is going on with Charles Leclerc and Ferrari? And most critically, Shez, is this going to lead to him finding himself at an outfit in Brackley anytime within the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? But I mean, it depends really what Brackley do. If they offer him, if they are suddenly producing a car that can actually compete for a title, then actually maybe it's worth him moving. But at the moment, it's all just talk, isn't it? Because there's actually only really one seat that's worth having right now. Well, 2 seats, and Brackley isn't it. So I feel like that whole story, as interesting as it is and as fun as it is to sort of imagine George versus Charles, and actually it's two players, Charles as a driver and Mercedes as a team, trying to draw attention away from the fact that there are severe deficiencies in what they've got at their disposal right now. But in answer to your question, yeah, I think number 1, Baku is a circuit that suits Charles very, very well. Has done since his F2 days. You guys will remember his final year in F2 where he took the win in Baku the day after his dad died. But the car, they were, you could hear in the strategy calls afterwards that that Ferrari were happy with the way that he was managing his tyres, but Charles managing his tyres meant that he wasn't quick enough, which suggested that his tyres were going to degrade quicker than what Red Bull's tyres were going to do. And pole was as good as it was going to get for him, unfortunately.
And what a pole lap, Baxty. But I just feel like it makes me happy and sad simultaneously, right? That this dude who's so adept, so brilliant at squeezing all of the pace out of that Scuderia Ferrari car when it matters most, that he doesn't have a car, ostensibly, that manages its tyres sufficiently well for a race. Baxty, what is going on here, bruv?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done my driver ratings for this race yet, but I will say that as a little preview that Charles Leclerc gets a 10 out of 10 because I don't think he could have done anything more with the machinery available to him. The Ferrari eats its tyres. It can't compete over any form of race distance against the Red Bull, particularly on a circuit like Baku, where as soon as they get DRS, they're going to go past him. I think he got lucky in the sprint with Max having his collision with George, and I think that did cost Max an opportunity to get P2. But even when Max had his problems in the Grand Prix with the safety car, it was fairly obvious that he was going to get past Charles, and that Charles was just a sitting duck. So yeah, in regards to Brackley, I think Mercedes needs to produce the goods first. At the moment, I don't see the need for Charles to leave Ferrari. They could fix their problems and these things go away. Much in the same way that at the moment Lewis doesn't need to leave Mercedes, but then at some point he may need to if then continually not delivering the goods. But certainly I think he is somebody that Mercedes are very interested in. We know the Mercedes philosophy is to have the two best drivers in the car at any one point. They've got George Russell. He's the long-term future. But who would be the best available driver to them? Max Verstappen ain't going to happen. The next driver down is Charles Leclerc, probably the quickest driver over one lap. He's definitely he's a Baku specialist. He's a wonderful, wonderful driver around Baku. In that crap box that was the 21 Ferrari, he stuck it on pole.
Mate, he's not bad, is he? He's not bad. Was it Curran that said that he thinks put all of these chaps on the grid currently in equal machinery, one lap to save the world, and he would pick Charles Leclerc over Max Verstappen. Both agree?
Probably. Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Chaos.
I think at the moment, I still think Lewis has got something there, but certainly he's not as quick as he used to be. But I think at the moment on raw pace, I would say Charles marginally over Max.
Go on then, lads. Let's play this game. Give me your top three very quickly because there's a million and other topics that we need to nail. Top three, equal machinery, one lap to save the world. Well, it sounds like we're all going Charles first. Who's coming number two, Shez, for you? One lap to save the world, equal machinery.
Oof. It's going to be between Max and Lewis probably for me. Man, that's so close to call. I'm going to say Lewis based on tenure and some of the laps he pulled out even in 21 were pretty unreal. But just to caveat that, I think his priorities have changed now. In line probably with the rules. I think his priorities are now far more towards the race, and you could see that even on Sunday.
Yeah, he's racing more, isn't he? Baxty, talk to me. Are you Lewis as well second?
I would say Lewis. Yeah, I think when Lewis is at one with the car and he's completely in sync with it, he can do things that not many others can. I think Charles just has this thing that he can just do. Like Charles is the same. When Charles is at one with that car, he can just blitz a lap. Yeah, Max can hassle a car. He can harry it round and get a quick time. And I think that Max would be my P3 choice. I'll jump the gun here and say Max is P3 marginally ahead of George and Fernando. But I think...
that's an interesting one, Baxty. Because I don't think Fernando's a brilliant qualifier. I think he, like you said, is definitely a hustler. Like he'll get a time out of any car. But I think we've said in the past before, I think if you get Lewis in a car that is as quick as it's going to be, if you put Lewis versus Fernando in the same car, Lewis is gonna beat that time. because Fernando will get a good time, Lewis will get an unreal time out of it.
It's funny. It's funny you should mention that. I remember that same interview where he was talking to Jensen, and he said, Fernando, you'd go out and do like a 121.3, and you'd come back in, and Fernando's done a 121.2, and you're just like, how on earth have you done that? So I think Fernando's quicker than people give him credit for.
I'd agree with that. And no mention, by the way, lads, when we're talking about fastest in equal machinery, of Carlos Sainz Jr., which is a bit of a disrespect. I know, but yeah, no, we're all disrespecting Carlos. But again, it felt like a bit of a seminal moment this weekend. Am I being a bit harsh, Baxty, in saying that this was the baptism of Charles Leclerc as Scuderia's de facto number one driver because of Carlos Sainz's underperformance? Or am I incorrect in saying that, and it was just a bit of an anomaly because he didn't have the time to set up his car properly and paid the price for it all weekend?
I mean, maybe that's the case, but he got cooked, didn't he? and even when they have the 3 sessions, Charles is still beating him. So, with the grace, I want to give a shout out to Josephine. Great F1
legend.
Twitter. She's brilliant on the spaces. She's also a massive Carlos Sainz fan, and I say this with the greatest of respect to her. But your boy's the number 2 driver, because Charles is consistently quicker than Carlos. He's consistently. Carlos is a great thinker in the car and can probably think himself 2 places ahead. But does he have that raw speed? No. And I think in the current situation, if Ferrari need to put their eggs in a basket, it needs to go to Charles Leclerc. Yeah, I'm surprised that we're saying this. I remember when 2019, the discourse was, when do Ferrari make the switch from Vettel to Leclerc? And they did it way too late. Now they have the opportunity here. I don't care how popular Carlos is within the team. That doesn't matter. Your best driver at the moment is Charles Leclerc. Back him.
Donate it. Well said, sir. Shez, to that you say what, sir?
I just find it very interesting that we're having this conversation about raw pace versus thinking in the car. Only 2 shakedowns after saying that Carlos is the man for making calls in the car. I do agree with you.
That's still true, though, Shez. But that's not that in and of itself, by itself, can only take you so far, right? I think this is what we're seeing live and in the flesh.
Yeah, I agree. But I think I totally agree with you. I think in terms of raw pace, there's no competition between Charles and Carlos. But I think Baku definitely exaggerated the gap between them because it's such a good circuit for Charles. So you're taking an already unbelievably quick driver and sticking him on a track that they really love, versus Carlos, who he's done better this season than he did at the beginning of last season. He's not making major errors, and he's a bit closer to the pace than he was last season.
Are you talking about Carlos?
Carlos, yeah, but there's always a step.
It was a pit stop away from Charles Leclerc.
In Baku, I think it really exaggerated their difference. Right?
That's bad, bruv.
Yeah, he got smacked, Cameron. I agree.
With a safety car as well thrown in there. Are you
I'm not arguing this. This is correct. You are right that Carlos very badly underperformed versus a very an overperforming Charles Leclerc on this weekend. But yeah, I mean in the longer term, it's not really tenable because Carlos is always going to start off a season slow. He's always going to have to play catch up. He'll eventually get to a pace that's sort of respectable, but never quite on Charles' pace. It's only Ferrari's own sort of internal monologue that is stopping them from doing what they need to do right now. But again, the slight caveat to that is that this season it probably doesn't really matter because I don't think they're in a title fight particularly.
It's of no, absolutely not. It's of no consequence this season.
Yeah,
but surely if there were a time when you wanted to start setting precedents as far as driver hierarchy, then this would be as good as any.
Part of that is down to Charles though as well, though, Cameron. Like part of that is for Charles to do what he didn't do last season, which is to absolutely just stamp out any kind of ambiguity about who is the lead driver there.
Well, I feel like that's what he's doing with putting a pit stop between him and his teammate.
Totally agree. He's doing what he needs to do. But next season, if their car is up for it, is when this is going to count.
Oh, Baxty, talk to me, sir.
Yeah, I mean, it's time for Carlos to get on the, stay on the pot or get off it without going too crude with that analogy. We've been calling him the man of tomorrow for years. He's now got the opportunity to prove himself. And the race win last year was brilliant. Yeah, it was fantastic. He put in some great drives at points, but is he going to be consistent enough across the season to win you a world championship? I don't think so. My Carlos Sainz stock is being sold. And I'm keeping some of it behind because I think maybe Audi could be a good fit for him, and he clearly needs to be a number one driver. I just don't think he's going to get that at Ferrari because there is a Monegasque in his way who is quicker than him.
Jeez, fundamental flaws. I'm loving it. Baxty, go on then, lads. In fact, there was something else I was going to touch on quickly, but I've bloody forgotten on that same topic. Right, let's move on. Let's talk Aston Martin and Alonso and Stroll. Very interesting interaction between the pair. Alonso saying a phrase that I thought I would never hear out of the Spaniard's mouth. If he wants to have a go, then let him. Shez, are we in a circumstance at Aston Martin where Fernando El Plan Alonso already feels sufficiently comfortable, feels like he's got his teammate under manners to where he can just say, you know what, if he wants to have a go. In fact, more than if he wants to have a go, how about you have this brake bias? Because I'm finding it quite useful at the moment, Lance. Is Fernando too comfortable and confident as versus his teammate, son of team owner Lance Stroll?
Too comfortable, I don't know, because he's still I don't think he sees Lance as his rival this season. He's seeing sort of the Ferraris as his rivals this season, right? So it's really I'm measuring myself against them, not against my teammate, because my teammate can't really compete with me.
That is chaos. That's
you know what I mean? And that's why I think he's happy to do all this. If you put Max in the car with him, like this conversation is not happening. And it speaks to the two sides of Fernando Alonso, the Fernando who's happy with his performance and where he sits within a team and what his performance is relative to his teammate, versus the Fernando who feels like he's under fire and everyone's out to get him. And they're two different characters that manifest themselves in different ways.
Circumstances. Very well said there, Shez. Baxty, talk to me about this Alonso, this new UNICEF altruistic Fernando Alonso that I thought I would never see.
Well, he clearly got so bored in the race that he was asking Lance to shake it up. And clearly the love story between... Sorry, I had to do it. That's the Taylor Swift reference out the way. Alonso's clearly feeling like Lance is like Stoffel Van Dorn, isn't he? He's just going to absolutely rip him to shreds and... I don't care if you're the boss's son, I'm going to beat you into submission. We've seen him do it before with Fisichella, with Trilly, Nelson Piquet Jr.
Everyone he's driven against, pretty much.
Everyone he's driven against, apart from Lewis, and Ocon as well to a lesser extent.
He had Ocon under manners,
and it's only because he had so many DNFs on the back of that badge of reliability.
I think, he clearly it's just like I've got him under manners. It's fine. I'm going to kick his ass.
And I remember, chaps, that at the start of the season, a lot of people were saying, it's going to get techie between those two. Like Alonso is always a chaos merchant. How does he manage Stroll stay cold since he's got this anomalous circumstance that his teammate is also the son of the owner? Listen, mate, they'll never be truly fighting over the same piece of tarmac in absolute terms. It will never come to that. It will never need to go full Dark Phoenix scorched earth, will he? It won't get that way, I don't think, Shez.
No, I don't think so at all. But
absolutely.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is going towards your little preview, so feel free to not answer. But between Charles and Fernando, who would you give driver of the day to if it was one of those two?
Charles, probably. I think
To
Fernando.
Charles, okay.
Yeah, Fernando did well to get P4. I don't think, considering Aston had a DRS problem, I think he did the best he could, and I think he got lucky with strategy, but and pulled off some good overtakes. But no, I'd definitely go for Charles.
That's interesting.
I think that's the correct answer, Shez. And then you know what? I've just remembered the one. So we've got 2 topics to nail in 10 minutes or less. Bloody hell. Quick answers, please, lads. if that's even a possible thing on the Shakedown. Checo Perez. I need to talk about this, lads. Go on then. In fact, let me couch it in these terms, very succinct. Yes or no answers. But for the timing of that safety car, if it doesn't happen, does Checo Perez, Baxty, still win that race and beat his teammate?
No.
Shez?
No, but it would be tight, and there'd be some radio calls.
So who are all these bods now saying that he had pace sufficient to beat Max Verstappen on the bloody overcut? What are these people smoking? Because I've heard very many serious F1 scribes espouse that theory and give it some credence.
He was definitely the faster driver this weekend,
but not fast enough to make the overtake. You don't think?
I think there would have been some circumspection that went on, and that would have put it in Max's favour. But in terms of who performed better, safety car or no safety car,
absolutely.
Perez was.
He was
ahead.
A quicker man. Yeah. Go on, Baxty.
Look at the way in which Christian was massaging a bruised ego with Max at the end of the race. You know, like, he only got lucky because of the safety car.
That's a good shout.
You know, if he'd got close, I mean, Checo could have ignored it, but we don't know whether he would do it because the situation never arose. There would have been a back off. Like Valtteri, it's James, Checo, it's Christian.
Yeah. Just maintain.
Stand it down. Yeah.
Maintain line of sight.
I would have loved to have seen the 2 go wheel to wheel. I mean, I think Max would have had Checo under manners in that situation anyway. Checo's a decent wheel to wheeler. I think he's better on the defense. I'd say Checo's greatest strength actually is keeping a gap, because that's the second race now. Yeah, it's a street circuit, but it's the second race now where Checo has been able to maintain a gap on Max. So maybe that's something for Max to work on. Maybe Checo can feel that if he can maintain that gap out front, can he close the gap as well? But yeah, at the moment, I just don't see Checo mounting a serious challenge at this stage.
Me neither, Baxty, but a lot of people, I don't know whether it's F1 media trying to create a storyline, but again, I feel like legend of the channel, Rory was saying something similar this time last year, right? That over the summer period, Checo was going to mount a very serious challenge and carry that momentum through to the latter stage of the season. I don't see it either. Once those tracks open up and it's not just city circuits, then I think Max will steal his lunch.
And the sort of parallel that people draw is Rosberg Hamilton in 2016, but this is a completely different situation.
Yeah.
And number one, they clearly don't have equal footing within that team, and second, in 2016, Rosberg was sort of 4-0 up within sort of 4 or 5 races. You know, Lewis had all of his mechanical issues, had all of his poor starts, and Nico was way ahead. Perez has had 2 race wins in which both of them have owed at least a little bit to luck. And the Jeddah race was because his teammate started at the back of the grid.
Yeah.
When he started at the back of the grid, he got nowhere near.
Fair, but is Shez, I will see that and I'll raise you. I think there are a couple of similarities, man. And I think the most important one is that Max, like Lewis, has pace in absolute terms over his teammate, right? So I think the story, and I tweeted something to this effect earlier on in the week, I think the tweet went something like Nico Rosberg needs to fax Checo Perez the how to beat a quicker teammate handbook. And I think there is something to be said for using everything in your disposal, leveraging every little bit of the armory tools in your toolbox to overcome that deficit. And I think that's what Checo need. I think going forward, if Checo doesn't do that, then we're going to see another season just like last year, right? If he does, though, if he starts going to those extremities that Nico Rosberg did, and we all know them, right? Like sleep consultants, taking off the bloody paint off your helmet for an extra 1,000th of a second or whatever, like all those extremities, Checo can get into that Nico Rosberg mentality, then maybe he still loses to Max Verstappen ultimately, but he that's what he needs to do to optimize his chances, right, Shez?
I don't think he has those tools. I don't think he has the tools that Nico had. Nico was embedded in the team from before Lewis turned up, so had a little bit of cash in the bank. Perez doesn't have that. The team's already well behind the guy on the other side of the garage. And in terms of his temperament, even I don't think he's got the temperament. He talks a good game in public, and I commend him for that. But there's a lot of recency bias in the way that we're talking about this. In that, yes, he's won fairly convincingly in Baku, but that's not been the pattern even this season. So I don't think he's got enough pace. Rosberg had at least a semblance of, beating Lewis every now and again to a pole position or two in a car that was equally dominant. But Perez doesn't have that. All things being equal, Max will out-qualify him every race. And in terms of the clout that he has within the team, it's not there. He doesn't have any leverage to leverage, essentially, which means that you're talking about him using all the tools at his disposal. I think he's already using them, and they're not enough.
Oh wow! How dare you?
Sorry, Checo.
Disrespect the Mexican Minister of Defense like that, Shez. How very dare you? Put some respect.
And this is the problem. He is a good Minister of Defense, not a good Minister of Attack.
He is the perfect number 2 driver.
He is. I agree with that.
Max has had problems. Okay, look, Checo out-qualified Max on Saturday, but when Max has had a problem, Red Bull need Checo to step up, and 2 out of 2 this season, he has nailed it.
Yeah, good.
And that's why we have half a semblance of a title fight at the moment after 4 races. But is he going to get backed by the team? No. Over Max? No chance. If Max DNFs every race from here until the end of the season, then obviously Red Bull are going to back him. But Max is still their number 1 driver. Checo is the perfect number 2 driver doing the perfect job right now. Better than he's ever done it. But he's not going to be a world champion with Red Bull.
Yeah, I agree. Is Checo 2.0?
You guys are being horrible, disrespectful. But no, I agree with you. He's the perfect number 2 driver, picking up the pieces whenever Max Verstappen drops them for whatever reason. Finally, lads, can we talk about some wooden spoon settings? Because this is Nicholas Latifi, isn't it? not Nick De Vries. It feels like Nicholas Latifi all over again. I've never seen somebody do this, but it must have happened. Latifi must have done it a couple of times. But Nick De Vries, apparently, he was last in the race, last in the sprint quali, and last in normal quali. Triple, not even a trip, that's like quadruple or quintuple, whatever the 5th one is, of wooden spoons. Are we seeing already, lads, the demise of Nick De Vries as a viable entity of an F1 driver, Shez? Or am I being a bit premature in that?
So De Vries came in on the back of that drive in Monza last season, right? And I think there's the problem that he's had is that the Williams car that he had in Monza was actually well suited to Monza. And if Albon had been there, I think he would have got more than just a single point. But it flattered him a little bit to the point that he was considered a viable Grand Prix driver. But he's now come to AlphaTauri, where the team principal doesn't trust the engineers and has now got the boot. And the car is clearly not a good car to drive. And the other guy who we've been criticising for not being quick enough is showing just how difficult that car is to drive, because actually he's showing up the guy that should be the wheel. I'm not going to say we, because I didn't, but that was touted to be the team leader this season. That's gonna show Yuki up. I can't see this going any other way than Nick gets shown the marching orders in the same way that Brendan Hartley was against Pierre Gasly a few seasons ago. It's that it seems to be he's there because Red Bull and AlphaTauri didn't have anybody else to put in the car.
Oh, geez, that is damning. Baxty, concur.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember who Nick de Vries's record. I mean, Nick had earned the right to be a full-time F1 driver. He F2 champion in 2019. I know people say the field was weak, but you know what? You still won it, and you still deserve the chance.
True.
Formula E world champion as well. That that deserves credit. That I know again people were saying, oh, it's only because he was consistent. Well, that's a good thing, having consistency. I just think clearly he's not got on top of that car, and it's not to his liking. I mean, there were better options out there than Nick. I think if we look back now, we think, okay, well maybe they could have put a Liam Lawson in the car now, or a Marcus Armstrong, or other options. And there are drivers sniffing at that seat. You've got the likes of, I mean, Lawson, I think, is ready to go. I think Nick could be shown the door halfway through this season if he keeps going the way he's going, because right now those performances are simply not good enough. And Red Bull are going to want to have somebody to prepare to replace Checo, be it a Yuki Tsunoda, but there's also Dennis Hauger. You've got Iwata. You've got Zane Maloney. You've got so many young drivers out there doing the business in F2 that eventually Nick is going to have to put up or shut up. And he's just been so poor this season. And I'm disappointed because I thought Nick was going to do really well. But
Me too. I was one of those people that you're calling out, Shez, and said I thought he was gonna put Yuki under manners, I'll be honest.
But can I give some props to Yuki at least? Like he's driven pretty well, especially in Baku. Actually, he put in a really, really good performance.
P7 in qualifying.
Yeah. Dropped back in the race, as you kind of expect him to, but it's encouraging. I want to see more of this from Yuki, to be fair, more than anything else.
Oh, chaps, it's all kicking off. I'm rating Yuki, man, but what I don't want to do is put the final nail in the Nick de Vries coffin a tad prematurely, because I feel like the space is trying to do that, and I think to Baxty's point that he's got a bit of pedigree, this Nick fella has, and I don't want to. I want to give him the requisite amount of runway that every F1 rookie deserves, right? Because Yuki didn't come in and just smash it straight away. They all have their hiccups and crashes. Even Max Verstappen, double world champion, for God's sake, doing a video on him at the moment. And this fella couldn't stop crashing when he first came in to F1. Even more recently, right? He's still prone to a cheeky accident.
But it's about their peaks and troughs, right? And Yuki scored points on his debut. He fell away and he needed a lot of work, but he was better the second season he turned up. So it's about peaks and troughs. And if Nick isn't even showing any good peaks, that's worrying.
Oh, Shez, you're a tough crowd, Shez, a hard man to please, but fair. This is the sport that we deal in, and a Red Bull outfit and the sword of Damocles on a young underperforming driver is it's like cheese and onion, right? Those two things go together. They are inseparable. Go on, Baxty.
Yeah, just quickly, I think if Nick was at any other team, he would get the season. But because he's at AlphaTauri, we know how ruthless Helmut Marko is with changing drivers. As I said, Liam Lawson's waiting in the wings. I think we could see a mid-season switch if he doesn't, probably by around Spa Monza time. We know how ruthless they are.
I mean, you only want to have a word with Messrs. Albon, Kvyat, and Pierre Gasly, right? They can definitely testify as much. Right, chaps, as we round fourth base, you guys have both been legends. Follow Shez, the legend that is, grizzled F1 scribe, the most handsome man on YouTube. Look at this. This is surely grizzled, right? Isn't that what you're going for there, Shez?
Sure, yes, grizzled.
Not worthy of the word grizzled. I'll take grizzled, man. I think that's endearing. Grizzled F1 scribe, Shez, at ShezMed on Twitter for all the hot takes and all the deep dives and inquisitive questions. Follow Baxty B, my co-host, at Baxty B on Twitter, and Baxty B F1 on YouTube. Again, some of the hottest, most insightful F1 content that you will see on all of the YouTubes and all of the interwebs. That has been another episode of the Shakedown podcast. For my co-host Shez, for my co-host Baxty, I have been Cameron F1 as always, and I can't remember that outro. Remember, as always, to look but never stare. Same time next week. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating if you're listening on a podcast. Nothing but love, as always. See you next week. Peace.